más de 200,000 emprendedores. Básicamente lo que hacemos es, en estas 175 ciudades hacemos un evento mensual en el que invitamos a un actor clave del ecosistema emprendedor a que comparta su experiencia, que eso va a ser un poco la dinámica de hoy, ¿no? Que alguien comparte y nos platique un poco qué es lo que está haciendo y qué es lo que le ha funcionado a él. Bueno, distintos medios han conocido lo que hacemos y les gusta y nos dan algo de reconocimiento en lo que hacemos. Algunos en Estados Unidos, pero también algunos aquí en México. Por último, algo que les comentaba también a los que estuvieron el día jueves, básicamente han surgido millones de aceleradoras en México, millones de incubadoras y todas te platican que tienen muchísimas conexiones en Silicon Valley y que conocen a todos los inversionistas del mundo. Pues nosotros conocemos a muchos, no a todos, pero a muchos, y lo que estamos haciendo es, si necesitan inversionistas, si necesitan mentores, si necesitan todo eso, se meten a la página, nos ponen qué necesitan, nos ponen qué hace su empresa, y con muchísimo gusto, si están en un nivel donde va a valer la pena, los conectamos y los conectamos gratis y no les pedimos nada. Entonces, para que de alguna forma, si se van a acercar a una aceleradora, les digan, oye, pues los contactos, todo esto ya tengo a alguien que me los da gratis, ¿qué más me vas a ofrecer? No, aparte de eso, esa es un poco la idea de este programa. Los invitados que tenemos o los actores clave del ecosistema que tenemos, básicamente el proceso como funciona es que les mandamos un correo, los invitamos a la plática y si ellos aceptan venir, a todo dar, porque no les pagamos ni el avión, ni las comidas, ni nada de eso, entonces, si me ayudan, vamos a darle un fuerte aplauso a nuestro invitado de hoy para recibirlo. Pásale, Chance. Cool. I think you're missing a mic. No? Yeah. It's coming. I think it's coming. Welcome to Mexico, to Campus Party, and to all this huge thing happening. Let's start with a little bit of your background, like where did you born and where you went to college, or if you went to college?
Yeah. So I was born in Dallas, Texas, and I then moved to Los Angeles when I was 10 years old. And I grew up in California, went to college in California at UC Santa Cruz. And at the time, I was interested initially in potentially going into medicine. And I was at UC Santa Cruz, and I met a couple of really fascinating, very successful people in the software and internet world at the time. And this was in 1996. And I became fascinated with someone who was the first business person I met who I thought was actually interesting. Before then, I didn't quite find a fascination with business. And he happened to be a brilliant, I also play music, so this was a gentleman who had started a company in the early days as a large competitor, Microsoft in the database days, was on the board of Motorola, really accomplished businessman, but also a very technical founder. So he had created some of the first object-oriented languages. He was a very successful mathematician as well. So I really was fascinated with this guy. And he was my first exposure to someone who was doing really big things in the world of internet software and startups. And I just took to it. I tried to learn as much as I could from him. He was an accidental mentor. He didn't really want to be a mentor to me, but I still got a lot out of him. And that was it. I had the web bug from there on out. And I ended up starting my first startup while I was in college, left, failed after a year, figured out I was a lot less knowledgeable than I was ambitious, and so I spent the next, 20 years now trying to level that out and become a lot more experienced than I am ambitious. But I think I'm about even now.
Okay, that's great. So in terms of startups, like what was this company about? The first one that it fails, like what was about? Like
at the time, it was an online community for people around education. There's a lot of friction if you're trying to get information about applying to colleges, if you're trying to transfer colleges, and it was highly inefficient. So what's always attracted me to startup opportunities are inefficiencies and places where I think systems can really smooth out experiences and transactions for people. I was not educated well enough on the legacy systems that exist within the educational system and didn't know the sales process well enough to really go after it. But I did have a great time because I met some great investors. I raised a tiny bit of money. I learned so much about what I didn't know, and that failure really helped me correct a lot of other stuff that I probably wouldn't have figured out had I not had that failure.
So that way of thinking, of trying to improve things, it's that what it took you to Crowdfunder?
Yeah, I mean, Crowdfunder is a couple of things. One, I think secretly, if I could work from a computer and not talk to humans all day, I would. But don't tell my team that or other people. I also like humans a lot. And I've had both really positive and really negative experiences with angel venture investors. I've had people who are really, really helpful and changed my life. And I've had people who have almost ruined my life, or certainly almost or have ruined businesses. So what appealed to me was the idea that you could create a network that would give more equal opportunity to both sides of the table. That entrepreneurs would potentially have a more democratic opportunity to get in front of investors. If they had a great idea, if they had great traction, it would be less about who they already knew and more about how great they were doing. And the other side of the table, that it wouldn't be just the wealthiest investors who are getting access to participating in these things, and that it truly was more open access to investing and the opportunity to help great entrepreneurs. So yeah, I think systems do appeal to me a lot, and I always am thinking about both what system can I build and then how do I add value to a customer. That's really a deep focus area of mine.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
I don't think his is working that well. If you could get it back on. His mic's not working.
It's not what.
Okay, we'll just do a handheld
Somehow
for you
working.
too.
Yeah. Let's just if you could just explain a little bit about Crowdfunder, like how it starts, but also what's the main function that it has.
Sure. So my company, Crowdfunder, I'm the co-founder and CEO. We do what's called equity crowdfunding. So you might be familiar with Kickstarter and Indiegogo. I'll give you an example of actually a campaign that best explains the difference between what we do and other crowdfunding platforms. There was a great company founded by a musician named Neil Young, and he started a company called Pono Music that has a much higher quality audio files that it plays. And so he was really looking to bring the quality of music back to the listener. He went out and did a Kickstarter campaign and pre-sold 15,000 units of his Pono Music player. That was a great outcome. They had raised about $6.2 million, validated the idea that there was a great product and demand in the market. But then they also still needed some more capital, working capital, to create more products, to build the company, to hire some great engineers. And so they came to Crowdfunder to raise actual equity investment, and that's what we do. So we allowed that crowd of people, both that existing community that loves the product, but also traditional investors anywhere in the country and all around the world to participate in investing for as little as $5,000. So in that campaign, we had about $10.2 million committed in just 10 days, a huge outcome, and they likely would not have been able to save the time that they were able to save simply using the power of the web and the great story and great product they had, rather than going around and hoping that they ran into investors that were really interested about the business and spending 4 to 6 months trying to haggle over term sheets.
Great. So basically you enhance companies to raise money online. But I would like to get a little bit specific on the details in this. So
sure.
There's a couple of companies that you should actually do something similar, but especially in Crowdfunder, what was the original idea on how you will monetize the platform, and how many changes, or how could you describe the changes and why you become right now like a subscription service instead of like in Mexico taking a percentage fee? Like what's the metric, or what's the idea behind calculating that?
So in every business, there's your model should fall out from your strategy, and then your KPIs should support all of that. Crowdfunder initially, we thought, although we started the company prior to new laws being put into place and actually helped those laws be shaped in the US and participated a bit here in Mexico as well, the idea was that we would take a percentage of the funds that we raise. But it's actually the case that our goals weren't to drive revenue and do what I would say is largely fewer transactions, because the moment you touch a customer in the world of equity and investment and you want to take a percentage, you're subject to all types of other regulations. And to make a long story short, it's not a very scalable business. And I've always enjoyed and wanted to build much more scalable businesses that can become things that grow much larger than the time you could ever spend on a service or a customer. And so what became new and innovative at Crowdfunder, but was also messy along the way, was finding the right model to say, what is a better scalable model? And it turned out for us, what's been working is a SaaS subscription model, where customers pay us just a small amount of money on a monthly basis in order to fundraise. So we have everyone paying us a very little amount of money relative to how much it would be if we took a percentage of funds raised from that, rather than taking a lot of money from a few people. And I also looked and thought really deeply about our customers and said, how is it going to look if I'm taking 5 to 7% of every single dollar that goes in? How are investors going to look at me and my platform versus just investing indirectly and not working with our platform? And in some ways, the idea of taking that money would misalign you between both the entrepreneur and investor in a deal. So the model that we landed on not only has us just taking this lighter and more scalable subscription model, but then also, and oftentimes, we end up marketing and helping the companies raise more actively, and we take equity in those companies, not cash out of their pockets, and that makes us a lot more aligned for the long-term success of the business. So investors also like that position and like working with us because we help in that way. So it's a more value-add model, I think.
Great. So you actually start in the US, and usually, I don't know if you agree with me, but usually companies wait a little bit longer to go outside the US, and I think you guys were very bold on coming to Mexico. So why you did that? What makes you decide to come to Mexico, and what did you find in Mexico once you were here?
There's probably two reasons that we came. One is had a great opportunity and great people inviting us that had relationships and credibility and a network here that was great. So it was an opportunity that looked like a strategic expansion opportunity for the company. And I'll put a caveat on that to say it's a big challenge, bigger generally than you would probably ever guess if you're thinking about doing international expansions in a startup. It's always a lot more work and more challenging to support than you would probably guess. That being said, we also did it because the longer term mission of Crowdfunder isn't just to drive investments, to make money, to scale a network. The larger mission is really that we believe entrepreneurship was one of the most powerful forces for social and economic change. And so what better place than right next to the US to have a test market where we see there's more challenges in access to capital. And we see this as a great test market that if we can figure out things here in closing that funding gap and figure out what role we play in an ecosystem, ideally that translates to a lot of other markets and impacts a lot more entrepreneurs.
So now that you have a little bit more knowledge in Mexico and how investments are working and everything, what do you say are the 2 or 3 elements that are missing right now, and you will think that it would make the whole difference if we were able to achieve that in the short or medium term?
So I think, well, first I'll say what's amazing about the ecosystem, and people in the States generally have no idea if they spend time here, is the great hacker and developer culture here. And it's, in a lot of ways, a lot less competitive to get great talent because there's not as many huge corporations trying to pay crazy wages and like steal all this talent. And it's also really collaborative and cooperative. It's fairly collaborative in the States and in Silicon Valley and in LA where I am at. But I do like to feel like this is a great representation of everyone in this room. So being part of this ecosystem and seeing how collaborative people are is really exciting. Where I think things are changing is 5 years ago, when I was first getting more involved in the venture ecosystem and learning about it, people would tell me, oh, well, that's nice, but people just don't invest in equity in Mexico. And the reason was largely it's just there's no trust. But it's a little deeper than that. There's also a lot less liquidity for investors, so you're along for the ride, and then when do you get your money out? There's not as many IPOs, things like that, and there's not as many exits. So debt was a lot more popular. Really, 2 years ago, people were still kind of saying that. Well, there's still not a lot of equity, and now no one says that anymore, and it's not the case. And so you have seed stage VCs, and you have more active angels, and then you have other early VCs investing and doing those early, higher risk Series A rounds. But I still think that's a real challenge here. The companies that are showing traction and get seed stage investment, I still see a really big Series A gap between that and then bigger VC money there. So I know that Inodem's working on that as well. They've been doing a great job giving money and investing as a fund of funds into VC funds. So I think over time it does take, the number is 20 years for a startup ecosystem to really develop. And that's often a function of this several startup founders creating big companies with a lot of people who are successful and learn, and also make a lot of money, who then come back and love the ride and invest in other entrepreneurs to do the same thing. And you have to see that cycle 2, 3, 4 times to get a lot of angel capital really flowing into the ecosystem. So it's cool to see more of that happening now, and it's early days, and it's on its way up.
Yeah, I agree with you. For me, the biggest element missing in Mexico is having successful entrepreneurs investing as angels. Yeah. Most of the people in Mexico being part of a venture firm are coming from banking. So that makes also the investors will not add a lot of value to the startups. So I think when we start seeing successful entrepreneurs coming back and invest would be like the thing that will make the ecosystem clicks. So what do you see, like Crowdfunder, what is going to happen with it in Mexico? Like right now it's working in this model with taking a commission and everything, but what's next, or it's that it?
So there's a couple of things that I think are really exciting that we're working on and I think would be a huge driver of value in Mexico in particular. One of the things we're looking at is actually doing a fund that would work more like a quantitative fund or an index that would be driven not by us doing diligence and trying to act like VCs, but act like a fund if it could actually be driven by more automated decisions based on data and correlation. So a simple example would be, I love the Mexican VC guys, 500 Startups guys. They're actually an investor of ours. I want to follow every single deal that they choose to invest in. And I want to do that between 25 and 100K in Mexico. So creating a fund at Crowdfunder that strategically does that, but then does that to take the role of also syndicating that investment out to other investors. So that way, Crowdfunder Mexico becomes a place where there is capital at the front end if you have certain things that are already happening and some traction. But then it also becomes a real pivotal point for investors to dive in because we're taking a more active role in that. So for me, that's a really interesting model that I think you're going to start to see in the platform world on the equity side. We've seen it happen massively on the debt and lending side for peer-to-peer. So companies like Lending Club, this is how they went from a couple $100 million in financing through the platform to, I think Lending Club's done $7 billion in the last, pretty recent years. And what happened is their business took off and scaled when institutional capital started being able to invest, not individual investors investing in individual deals. So that's a huge opportunity, and that's something we're working on. And so I'm really excited for that kind of thing to be put in place in Mexico, because I think it'll accelerate investment even further, even faster.
In Mexico, we don't have like in the US, or I think I might be wrong, but I think we don't have like an accreditation for investors in Mexico like that really works. How do you manage to do that? Like to bring people to the platform that actually will invest? Because syndicates are some awesome thing that are working, but sometimes you have a ton of followers and they just not convert. So even though it's amazing to have 1,000 people backing you up in the platform, they will not invest. So how do you manage to convert people that will actually invest in the deals?
So the ironic thing I would say, while equity crowdfunding and Crowdfunder can be a really fantastic and big demand generation tool for investors, unless it's some crazy like celebrity div and deal where people aren't investing for value but are investing for, just to be on the ride, so it's not really rational. It still requires an intelligent, capable human being to close those investors. So what we see is better distribution and flow into deals, but what still exists oftentimes is the skill and the talent and the hustle of closing those investors. So there's probably on average about 50% of people who express interest or commit to invest still hedge and take a while or don't close. And so what's interesting, and I also think a good opportunity is, one, we spend a lot of time with our entrepreneurs educating them on how they pitch their business. That's actually where we spend the most time. They come in and they think they have a good pitch, and they're actually a million miles deep in their pitch, and you can't understand what they do even after 2 minutes. In fact, you're more confused. So coming in the door, we try and give them a mirror and then show them other ways that we've helped people shape their pitch and give them a standard set of education materials. And then our platform also breaks it down more systematically to help you put out traction points, really highlight the things that'll lead people into hearing a compelling story about your company. So at Crowdfunder Mexico, that's, I also think, a really big opportunity to play that trusted role, but to also help entrepreneurs understand how to be more effective themselves at closing, because there's really oftentimes no one better who can close than if you help that entrepreneur a little bit, they'll be a much better closer than you. I've closed many more millions of dollars from investors than an entrepreneur might, but they know their business a lot better, right? And they're the person that someone has to feel passionate about and invest in. So getting them in a shape where they're really ready to, if they get, say, 20 investment leads from Crowdfunder here in Mexico, have them be much more effective at making sure those convert, because we don't give them the expectation that they should just hope those people click a button and finish. We tell them, you really want to engage and reach out and get to know these people. You should also vet that investor, but be prepared to close them and do that very quickly. So we recommend and pretty much watch them and force them to say, if someone makes a commitment to your deal, you need to reach out to them within 24 hours if they haven't already, signed docs and put their money in. So that's a really, really important piece.
And one of the companies that I own, one of the startups, we actually started at some point the process to do it through Crowdfunder. Fortunately, one of the previous pitches that we did pays out, and we didn't go through the whole process. But I think, and you just say it, one of the things that I most like about Crowdfunder is the way you can structure your information and have a very well-structured document at the end. Because sometimes, and we saw it earlier with Dave, giving feedback in the pitches, like, it's almost impossible to have all the elements just because you're so used to your company that you assume a lot of data that the investor wouldn't know. So I think everyone should take a look at Crowdfunder, because it will tell you what kind of data investors are looking for, and maybe it's not that important for you, but for an investor, it's like a key aspect. So how is the process for any startup to go into the platform?
So it's actually free to join and go through a whole guided process, and we help you structure the presentation of what you're offering and pitching to investors. So if you sign up, you're just put through a guided process, and it actually scores kind of like how you would see on your LinkedIn profile. You only have 10 or 20 or 50% done, and we walk you through each of those segments. And then we do show you example profiles of ones that have been funded, been successful. And then we also kind of highlight, and I do think that's a really good idea, take a look at the companies that are already on there, the way we've helped them, or they've been smart to spell out the numbers and the data points that investors are looking for. We generally just have a section that stands out that's right in the first fold that's called traction. And we tell them, hey, oftentimes entrepreneurs are bearing some of their best data. So they forget about it, they're lost in it, or they assume that investors understand it.
Yeah, and I think a great thing also, it's once you guys see the companies that are already there, you can put in the set of mind of an investor, and you'll see how the data makes very easy for you to say, if I had the money, I would invest or not, because you'll see and you'll understand pretty easy, even though the business might not be very clear, but you see if they're growing, if they're having more clients. So yeah, that's right now. Thank you very much. Chance, if any one of you wants to ask some questions, we will be more than happy to. Well, Chance will be more than happy to answer.
Or you.
And usually the first one is hard, but after that, people get more. Yeah.
Hi. Is there some kind of steps to make your presentation or your pitch for investors? There's a preferably way that investors want to hear, like numbers or just the scale of the idea, or how?
Yes. So I actually created a free resource for this. It's available on Crowdfunder, and I write for Forbes, but it's called the Ultimate Pitch Deck for Startups. I show you the example that Reid Hoffman used to pitch Greylock to raise money for LinkedIn, which then became a huge success in IPO. I take a lot of the decks and some information that Dave McClure put out about the decks he likes and sees. So I basically condense all of the best information out there about decks. And what it sums out to is there's really 10 to 11 slides that investors want to see that tell a basic narrative and story about who you are, what you do, why you're doing it, where you're at, and then what the future looks like. So this spells out really the 10 or 11 slides you need to have and what you should have and the data points on each of those. So that's very specific. And then I would say once you have that structure, get creative, right? So great design happens and great ideas happen when you have boundaries around it. So you can download that for free. It's on our site at Crowdfunder. There's a section that's called Learn, and you'll see resources, and the free pitch deck is one of them, and then you can tweak it to be your own.
Perfect.
Cool.
Good night. I'm Nayeli. My question is about how the platform actually works. Like, you take any project, or how do you pick the one that's going to be like the chosen one for you? Yeah. Or yeah, how do you pick it?
So in Crowdfunder in the US, we're an open platform where anyone who pays our SaaS fee can fundraise as long as they have a company in good standing and the minimum set of documents. And then we help and push and co-market some of those deals ourselves if we get involved. And that's usually driven by knowing some of the investors that are involved with the company. Here in Mexico, we have a slightly different model. So we do take applications. So people can simply sign up on Crowdfunder Mexico and put up their project, and then our team reviews those and looks. And then we put a set of those more actively in front of the investors. So things are changing and evolving with our Mexico team, and we've just gotten another set of venture investors involved in the running of the platform here. So we're excited because there's also more capital behind the platform, not just from the investor network that's external to Crowdfunder, but us as investors at Crowdfunder as well. So if you haven't taken a look or you haven't joined, it's just crowdfunder.mx. And then I think some of our team is here, so I'd be happy to hook you up with them. So great. Any other question?
What happens when the project fails? How do you take back the investment?
You don't.
Just like
so,
that. Are there any consequences for the startup?
So there's, I mean, the blanket number is 9 out of 10 startups fail, but it's probably maybe a little less these days because there's ways of salvaging. But I think that's a cultural thing that investors have to begin to understand more. Investing in early stage, seed stage startups, which is oftentimes it goes to zero and there's very little assets. So this is new for a lot of people in the ecosystem here, but it's changing rapidly. Also, even when startups are successful, the average time that an investor has to hold and never gets any money back, the average time is 7 years. And that's in the US. So I'm not sure what the number is here. There are challenges with startup investing. You do and should think about building a portfolio if you're investing, and you have to plan to not have liquidity on those for a very, very long time. For us at Crowdfunder, the way we think about that and how we're working to build a bigger product in the future is to create a way for people to diversify and invest a little bit across a lot of companies, just like you would recommend someone to do in the public stock market. You would say, spread your risk, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So that's something we're working on to allow investors to have an easy time putting, instead of say $50,000 into 2 companies, put 10 into 5 companies and diversify a bit that way, or even more radically, 5,000 in a bunch of different startups and invest in 10. So that's something I think we'll start to see in our space, and we're working on solving that problem for investors. But we can't change those outcomes that, unfortunately, a lot of the startups fail. Thank you.
I understood that there are country restrictions for the startups in crowdfunder, right? And are there these limitations also for investors, or all investors all around the world can invest in crowdfunder?
So technically, the way that it works at Crowdfunder in the US is as long as someone hasn't marketed their deal publicly under what's called a 506C offering, which means you're publicly advertising, and anyone who goes to the website can see it publicly. If you do that, you really can't take foreign investment because you would often violate the foreign laws in that country, not in the US. So we had this in some countries with Pono Music, where they couldn't take foreign investment for a portion of the countries because their laws don't allow you to advertise to their investors. So there's a neat little way around this, though, which is to raise money privately inside Crowdfunder. So there's a technicality. If you raise money and people can only discover it if they've registered for Crowdfunder as an investor, and then they see it inside the registration, behind the registration wall, that's no longer a public offering, thus foreign investors can invest. So it's as simple as a Mexican investor could go to crowdfunder.com, log in, and if they satisfy the accredited questionnaire and they're a accredited investor, they can see any company that's fundraising and they could invest in those as a foreign investor because they're not publicly fundraising. So there's several technicalities, but the short answer is yes, foreign investors can and do invest.
Good night. Sorry for my English. I don't understand you if you speak so fast. Excuse me. My question is, do you know someone in the USA that is connected with Mexican investors, whatever, if they are from the USA, if they live in Mexico or whatever, that buy me solar stuff for $300 and take it for your country?
Buy for $300 and pay you for what?
I mean, to take you, no, I mean, the investor to take the stuff to the USA with him or with her. Do you know anybody?
Are you asking, do we know investors that could invest in your company?
To be sincere, I don't have a company. I am an electromechanical engineer, and I have designed this more than a solar stuff. But this solar stuff is just a little part of a bigger project. But okay. I don't have money, and I can sell the solar stuff. All what I need is just a photo to follow my project, to prove that it works. to prove it working. That's all.
Cool.
And I want to say do you know? So when I mean, because maybe an American could say, I am not living in Mexico, but you can cook without gas with it. Do you know anybody?
Okay, sure. Why don't we talk after, and I'll see if I can help. Yeah. One more question? That sound good?
Hi. I just wanted to ask you about the revenue share models.
Could you speak up a little bit? Sorry.
Okay. Give me a sec. I just wanted to ask you about the Mexican models of like the revenue share, how they work under Crowdfunder.
So our model, Crowdfunder Mexico, is that we do take a percentage of funds that get raised. And we at times have helped entrepreneurs offer what's called revenue share to investors. So there's two ways that that can work. One of the ways is that in the revenue share, you give them a percentage of, say, the revenues that you bring in over a fixed amount of time. So say it's 2 years, you would promise a revenue share stream over 2 years. So it can be capped either by amount of time, or it could be capped by the amount of total return. So those are the two basic models, and within that you can kind of choose what you think is best for you. We try and be helpful and suggestive to you about the impact of different models, but at the end of the day, we're not your legal counsel, and we can't like decide that for you, but we like to give education and try and be helpful. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you, guys.
Un aplauso, por favor.